I was in a terrible accident and rushed to the hospital unconscious. The doctors called my parents, but they said, we can't. Our other daughter Isis is walking her dog. Even after being told, tonight might be her last, they still didn't come. A week later, they finally showed up, but my hospital bed was empty. All that was left was a single note. The moment they read it, the color drained from their faces. You know those moments when your whole world shatters? When the people you thought loved you most reveal a betrayal so deep it makes your blood run cold. Well, that's exactly what happened to me, and it started on a cold, rainy night in Boston. It was a typical October afternoon in Boston, crisp and short, the kind where the wind starts to really bite, scattering leaves down the street. I was Emily Watson, a nurse at Central Hospital, just about done with another brutal night shift. After one last check on my patients and handing over to the next nurse, I dragged myself to the locker room. Another tough day, huh, Emily? Jennifer, a senior nurse, asked, her eyes full of sympathy. Any plans for the weekend? I just smiled and shook my head. Nah, Mom and Kate are off shopping in New York tomorrow. I'll be home, battling a mountain of laundry. Jennifer sighed. You always seem to take on all the housework. Don't you ever take some time for yourself? It's fine, I'm used to it, I shrugged. What I didn't say out loud was that caring for my family had become my default setting. In the Watson household, it was just assumed I'd handle most of the chores. I left the hospital and headed back to my quiet apartment. It was modest, but I kept it spotless. My fridge was covered in postcards from my dad, London, Paris, Rome, little magnets holding up memories of his work travels. My dad, Thomas Watson, was an executive at a big trading company, always jetting off overseas. He was calm, rational, and he'd always treated me like I was special. When I decided to become a nurse, he was the only one who actually supported me. The phone rang and I hurried to answer. It was my mom, Martha. Emily, do you remember the dinner party tomorrow? Kate's designer friend is coming, so be back by 6 o'clock. Yeah, I remember. Have you finished the shopping? Oh, well, Mom said, a little awkwardly. Kate and I decided to go shopping in New York tomorrow afternoon. We'll be back by evening, but could you take care of the shopping and dinner preparations? I bit back a sigh. All right, I've taken time off, so it's fine. Thank you, as always, Emily. You're always so dependable, Martha chirped. Since you're a nurse and independent, these things are no problem for you. Kate is still establishing her career, so networking is important for her. I hung up and just sank onto the sofa. My sister, Kate, worked as a freelance interior designer. Talented, charming, sociable. She was my parents' favorite. My mom, especially, was obsessed with Kate's social success. My cell phone buzzed. It was a video call from my dad. Emily, how are you? His face appeared on the screen, looking like he was in a hotel room. I'm fine, Dad. Where are you now? Paris. Planning to fly to Brussels tomorrow. He looked tired but smiled. A new project has started. Looks like I'll be on an extended trip in Europe. How long? I asked, worried. About 3 months, I'd say, he said, apologetically. I'm sorry, I won't make it back for your birthday. Don't worry about it. Is work difficult? Yes, but I'll definitely call you. Then his expression turned serious. Emily, contact me right away if anything happens. Anytime is fine. I understand. I smiled. His kindness always warmed my heart. And please look after Martha and Kate too. They'd be lost without you, he joked, but there was truth in his words. Of course. As always, I answered lightly. The following week, Dad left for Europe. I fell back into my busy routine, alternating night and day shifts. At home, a mountain of housework for my mother and sister always awaited me. My presence was taken for granted, and my efforts were rarely acknowledged. Then came the fateful day. It was a cold, rainy evening in early November. I was leaving the hospital after finishing my night shift exhausted. As I crossed an intersection, a huge truck, which should have stopped at the red light, came skidding toward me. The impact hit, and then, darkness. My consciousness came and went, like being underwater. People were bustling around, voices muffled and distant. The emergency room at Central Hospital was buzzing with tension. The medical staff, my colleagues, worked as one to save their own, Emily Watson. It's Watson. She was on her way home after the night shift. Dr. Martin, the emergency department chief, exclaimed, recognizing me. Contact her family. From my personal file, they found my mother Martha's number listed as the emergency contact. A young nurse dialed with trembling hands. It was still dark before dawn. Hello, Mrs. Watson. This is the emergency department at Central Hospital. Your daughter, Emily, has been in a traffic accident. On the other end, Martha answered in a sleepy voice. Emily? What happened? She's in critical condition. Could you come to the hospital right away? After a moment of silence, an unexpected reply came back. I'm out walking my sister's dog right now, so I can't. Perhaps I can come in the afternoon. The young nurse listened in disbelief and asked again, Ma'am, your daughter is in a very dangerous condition. She has multiple traumas and is bleeding. Could you please come right now? I told you I can't right now. Martha's voice was laced with irritation. Kate's poodle is on a strict schedule. Besides, Kate and I have plans to go to New York this afternoon. The call ended. The young nurse was dumbfounded. She reported the situation to Dr. Martin. The doctor frowned, but treating the patient was the priority. Let's try calling again later. For now, let's focus on saving her life. I was rushed to the emergency operating room. Internal ruptures, multiple fractures, head trauma. My condition was deteriorating by the minute. The surgery lasted 6 grueling hours. By the time it ended, it was already past noon. Dr. Martin called Martha again. This time, he explained the situation in a stern tone. Mrs. Watson, your daughter's condition is extremely critical. She has multiple fractures, internal injuries, and brain edema. I strongly recommend that you come as soon as possible. I understand, Martha replied curtly, but there was no further response. I was moved to the ICU. Only machines and 4 stands surrounded my bed. There was no sign of my family. Instead, my fellow nurses took turns sitting by my bedside, holding my hand. Emily, can you hear me? We're here with you, Jennifer whispered in my ear. Hang on, you can definitely overcome this. As the night deepened, Martha and Kate still hadn't appeared. Someone suggested contacting Dad in Europe, but his number wasn't listed in the emergency contacts registered by Martha. My cell phone had been shattered along with my bag at the accident scene. On the afternoon of the second day, Martha and Kate finally showed up at the hospital. They were carrying designer shopping bags and looked annoyed by the ICU's visiting restrictions. Only 15 minutes? You must be joking. We came all the way back from New York. Kate complained to the nurse. Martha and Kate put on protective clothing and were guided to my bedside, accompanied by Jennifer. I was connected to a ventilator, my swollen face covered with purple bruises, my body surrounded by medical equipment. Oh, what a troublesome child, Martha sighed. She stood at the edge of the bed without touching my hand. Don't tell your father, it will only worry him. She then said, coldly, honey, get better soon. We don't have time to take care of you. Kate looked at her phone screen. Let's go back soon, Mom. We'll be late for dinner with Jeff. Before 15 minutes had passed, they left the room. Jennifer, trembling with anger, but suppressing her emotions as a professional, continued to care for me. In my fading consciousness, I had heard fragments of my mother and sister's conversation. My heart froze, not from the pain, but from the cold, hard reality. In the midst of this, a question formed in my mind. Why hadn't my father contacted me? If he knew the situation, he would surely come running. The 3rd and 4th days passed. My condition fluctuated. My colleagues continued to care for me devotedly, sitting by my side between shifts. Martha and Kate never showed up again. On the evening of the 5th day, my consciousness returned slightly. I called out in a hoarse voice, Papa. Jennifer, who was in the room, gripped my hand tightly. Emily, can you hear me? Move your finger. I moved my finger slightly. It was enough to make Jennifer cry. Thank goodness, thank goodness. Jennifer gently kissed my forehead. We're trying to contact your father, but he's overseas. I closed my eyes again. However, my brain was gradually regaining function. I tried to understand the situation from the fragmentary conversations I heard. Why was there no contact from my father? Why hadn't my mother and sister informed him? By the 7th day, my condition miraculously began to stabilize. I could breathe without the ventilator for short periods, and my consciousness became clearer. The doctors were amazed at my resilience. Nurses are tough, Dr. Martin said, delighted with my recovery. Your recovery is a medical miracle, Emily. I asked Jennifer for paper and a pen. With a shaking hand, I wrote one question. Contact Dad. Jennifer showed a troubled expression. Your mother said to keep it from your father, but of course, we should contact him. Do you have his contact information? I nodded weakly and tried to write a number on another piece of paper. However, my body was still weak, and the pen slipped from my hand. Instead, I wrote, Dad's company. Jennifer nodded in understanding. I see. Thomas Watson, European branch manager of Global Trading Company. I'll try to find him. I squeezed Jennifer's hand, conveying my gratitude. In my mind, my mother's words, "Don't tell your father," kept repeating. Why didn't my mother want to inform my father? There had to be some hidden reason. And I made a decision. I had the right to know, and my father had the right to know the truth. While pushing my weak body, I began to formulate a plan. On the morning of the 8th day after the accident, the Boston sky was covered with leaden clouds. A luxury SUV slid into the Central Hospital parking lot, and Martha and Kate got out. They headed for the hospital entrance, showing the fatigue from last night's party on their faces. "Let's get this over with quickly," Martha said. "We need to make it to our spa appointment this afternoon." "Why does Emily always cause problems?" Kate sighed. "Dad's coming back the day after tomorrow, and we're in this situation." Martha's face tightened. "I haven't told your father about the accident. I told him she's been in bed for a few days with a simple cold. But what if Dad tries to call Emily directly? Emily's cell phone was destroyed in the accident. Besides, Dad thinks Emily is busy with night shifts, so he won't think it's strange if he can't reach her," Martha replied. "Anyway, today, let's tell her Dad's worried about you too and leave quickly." The two approached a nurse at the ICU entrance. "We're here to visit Emily Watson." The nurse checked the chart and showed a slightly confused expression. "Mrs. Watson, this way, please." Martha and Kate followed the nurse, completely unaware of anything amiss. The solemn atmosphere of the ICU enveloped them. In other rooms, family members were praying, encouraging, and sometimes crying at patients' bedsides. However, no such emotions were visible on their faces. The nurse stopped in front of a bed by the window. As the curtain was opened, Martha gasped at the sight. The bed was empty. The sheets were neatly made, and the four-stand and heart monitor had been removed. Emily was nowhere to be seen. "Has she been transferred somewhere?" Martha asked the nurse, her voice containing more displeasure than surprise. The nurse answered calmly, "No, she's been discharged." "Discharged?" Kate exclaimed. "But wasn't she in critical condition?" "Miss Watson's recovery was remarkable," the nurse explained. "Though she was in a dangerous state for a while, with her strong will and resilience, she was given permission to leave last night." "But where did she go?" Martha asked in a confused voice. "She hasn't come home." "I'm sorry, but I cannot answer questions regarding the patient's privacy," the nurse said politely. Martha couldn't hide her irritation. "I'm her mother. I have a right to know." "Oh, Mom, look." Kate pointed at the bed. There's something there." In the center of the bed lay a white envelope. On the surface, for Martha Watson, was written in careful handwriting. Martha quickly took the envelope and pulled out a memo. As her eyes followed the text, the color drained from her face. "Mom, what's wrong?" Kate felt uneasy at her mother's change. Martha's hands began to tremble. She sat down on the edge of the bed and began to read in a shaking voice. "To Martha, if you're reading this, you've finally come to the hospital. It's been 8 days since the accident. In an accident at an intersection after my night shift, I nearly died. Even when the doctor said, 'Tonight is critical,' you said, 'I'm walking my sister's dog so I can't come.'" Martha's voice broke. Kate sat down next to her and peered at the memo. "Even while I was unconscious, you only came to visit once. During that one visit, you said, 'Don't tell your father.' Why? Why didn't you tell Dad?" Kate looked at her mother. "Mom, this is..." Martha continued reading, biting her lip. "I wondered why Dad wasn't contacting me. He would surely be worried. Then I realized the truth. You hadn't told him." Martha's face turned pale and her hands shook more violently. But that was just the tip of the iceberg. As I began to regain consciousness, I asked Jennifer to contact Dad's company. Then a surprising fact came to light. Dad wasn't in Europe but in Asia. What he told you was a 3-week business trip, not 3 months. Kate gasped. "Mom, what does this mean?" Martha's face contorted with fear, and she stopped reading. "Read the rest." Kate pulled the memo from her mother. "So I investigated further. Your story about Dad's 3-month business trip was a lie. Why would you tell such a lie?" I found the answer. Having lost my cell phone, I thought to use the house phone and quietly returned home last night. Then I heard your voice from the living room. Your voice talking to a man. Martha covered her face and began to sob. "Thomas won't be back for 3 weeks, don't worry," you were saying. When I slightly opened the living room door, I witnessed everything. You, together with Joseph Baker, your lover. Kate moved away from her mother, taking the memo in a stunned manner. And then, the most shocking conversation followed. "We must keep it a secret that Kate is not his daughter." "DNA doesn't lie," you said. The paper slipped from Kate's hands. She stared at her mother with an incredulous expression. "Mom, is this true?" "My father isn't Dad." Kate's voice trembled. Martha couldn't answer. She picked up the memo and read to the end. "I gathered all the evidence, recordings of your conversations, copies of emails between you and Joseph, and Kate's DNA test results. I sent all of these to Dad by international mail this morning. He has the right to know the truth. Goodbye, Martha. From your daughter, Emily." The moment she finished reading the memo, Martha's cell phone rang. The screen displayed the name Thomas. Martha tried to answer with trembling hands, but the ringing stopped immediately. It was already too late. Emily had revealed the entire truth. What should I do? Martha collapsed onto the bed. Thomas knows everything. Kate stood by the window, away from her mother. Her world had completely crumbled over these 8 days. Meanwhile, in a suite on the 34th floor of the Grand Hyatt Hotel in Hong Kong, my father, Thomas Watson, stood by the window, gazing at the vibrant night cityscape. The restructuring of the Asian branch was going more smoothly than expected, and he was likely to finish ahead of the initial 3-week schedule. He planned to return to Boston on tomorrow afternoon's flight. A knock was heard at the door. "Come in," Dad said. The hotel concierge entered. "Mr. Watson, a package has arrived for you. It's international mail." "Thank you." Dad received a brown envelope. After the concierge left, Dad examined the envelope. It had a Boston postmark, and the sender was Emily. He smiled at the unexpected mail from his daughter. He thought it must be a thoughtful gesture, typical of me. However, when he opened the envelope, its contents far exceeded his imagination: a USB memory stick, several photos, and a letter from me. He first unfolded the letter. "To my dear Dad," my meticulous handwriting jumped into his eyes. "As you read this letter, you will surely receive a great shock, but you have the right to know the truth. Last week, I was in a traffic accident. I was seriously injured in a collision with a large truck and was hovering between life and death for a time." The color drained from Dad's face. He sat down in a chair. "Mother did not inform you of my accident and apparently told you Emily is in bed with a cold. Even when the doctor said, 'Tonight is critical,' Mother would not come to the hospital." Dad's hands began to shake. The content was unbelievable. "When I regained consciousness, I wondered why you hadn't contacted me. Upon investigation, I learned that Mother had told you about a 3-month business trip. Why would she tell such a lie? And by chance, I came to know the truth." Dad continued reading the letter. "My accidental discovery of my mother's infidelity at home, the conversation about Kate's biological father, it was content that fundamentally overturned the foundation of his married life. The evidence is in the USB, recordings of Mother and Joseph Baker's conversations, their email exchanges, and Kate's DNA test results." Dad inserted the USB into his laptop. There, just as I had said, the evidence was neatly stored. In the recorded conversations, Martha and Joseph were talking intimately, planning their rendezvous during Dad's absence. The email history documented their relationship spanning over 20 years. Finally, he opened the PDF of the DNA test report. Among the scientific terminology, the words 0% probability of paternity jumped out at him. Dad returned to the window and gazed at the night view. However, what his eyes saw was not the brilliance of Hong Kong, but the sight of 28 years of married life crumbling away. "Emily," he murmured, "my name, the name of his only real daughter." Boston Logan International Airport. Dad emerged from the terminal with a tired expression. The 20-hour flight had exhausted not only his physical strength, but also his mental fortitude. However, what dominated his heart was not fatigue, but anger and determination. Hailing a taxi, he first headed to Central Hospital. However, at the reception, he was told his daughter had already been discharged. Discharged? But wasn't she seriously injured? Dad was confused. Miss Watson's recovery was remarkable, the nurse explained. Her colleague Jennifer Foster said she would care for her at home, and the doctor gave permission. Dad breathed a sigh of relief. At least I was in a safe place. He asked for Jennifer's contact information, deciding to visit later. Next, he took a taxi home. As the car entered the quiet street of the upscale residential area, he felt his heart rate increase. The house he had lived in for over 20 years now felt like an unfamiliar place. Opening the front door, he quietly entered the house. He could hear sounds coming from the living room. Martha and Kate seemed to be working on something. "Thomas," Martha exclaimed in surprise upon seeing him. "You weren't supposed to be back until tomorrow." "Work finished early," Dad said coldly. His eyes noted the suitcases and boxes scattered around the living room. Preparing to move. Martha's face tensed. Thomas, I couldn't answer your call. I can explain. Explain? Dad's voice was quiet yet dignified. Can you explain over 20 years of lies? Kate stood silently in the corner of the room, her eyes red and swollen, as if she had been crying. Where is Emily? Dad asked. I don't know. She discharged herself, Martha faltered. By herself. Dad's voice rose. How can you say that after abandoning your daughter who was seriously injured? Thomas, you don't understand. I had circumstances. Enough. Dad raised his hand. I heard everything from Emily. I saw the evidence about you and Joseph Baker and about Kate's father. Kate sniffled quietly. I didn't know anything, Dad. I mean, Mr. Thomas. Dad looked at her for just a moment. His eyes showed sadness rather than anger. Kate, this is not your fault. You're a victim too. Martha collapsed onto the sofa. Thomas, please forgive me. Forgive you. Dad sneered. After deceiving me for over 20 years? After making me raise Kate knowing she wasn't my child? And the worst is that when Emily, my only real daughter, was nearly dying from an accident, you abandoned her. Martha couldn't argue. She just cried. I want an explanation. Dad folded his arms. Why did you hide Emily's accident? Why didn't you tell me? Martha answered in a trembling voice, because if you came back, I wouldn't be able to meet Joseph. Dad was speechless at that excessively honest answer. He shook his head and said quietly, Emily was my only daughter. That's the truth. He opened his briefcase and took out documents. This is a divorce agreement. I've already contacted a lawyer. Including claims for compensation, everything will proceed as written here. I want you both out of this house by tomorrow. But where should we go? Martha appealed, crying. That's your problem, Dad said coldly. It's time to pay the price for 20 years of lies. He went upstairs to his study. Closing the door, he released his emotions for the first time. With a deep sigh, he collapsed into his chair. On the desk was a photo of him and me. It was a commemorative photo from the day I graduated from nursing school. He picked up the photo and traced my smile with his finger. Emily, he murmured, I'm sorry I couldn't protect you. Morning light streamed through the window of a small Boston apartment. In a room in Jennifer Foster's apartment, I sat on the sofa, reading a book. My body was still weak and faint, fading scars remained on my face. A knock was heard at the door. When Jennifer opened it, Thomas Watson was standing there. Emily. Dad spotted me as soon as he entered the room. He approached quietly and knelt before the sofa. Emily, I'm sorry I couldn't protect you. I took my father's hand, tears in my eyes. Dad, do you know everything? Yes, everything, Dad nodded. I saw your letter and the evidence. The lies of that family, and that no one was by your side while you were suffering from the accident. My colleagues were there for me, I smiled. Like a real family. A month later, Dad and I moved to a new apartment. He had left the company he had worked for many years and transferred to another firm in Boston. He had chosen to work near his daughter. How's the position of the shelf? Dad asked as he mounted a bookshelf on the wall of the new living room. Perfect, Dad. I smiled. My condition was improving day by day. At dinner time, my colleagues from the hospital began to visit frequently. They warmly welcomed Dad and me, nurturing bonds like a new family. You saved my daughter, Dad thanked Jennifer and the others at one dinner. You taught us what a real family is. The aftermath for Martha and Kate was as they had imagined. When Joseph, Martha's lover, was discovered by his wife, he abandoned Martha and disappeared. Financially strapped, Martha began to make a living working part-time at a high-end boutique. Kate, with the DNA test report in hand, tried to find her biological father. However, Joseph refused to acknowledge her, coldly rejecting her with, "Don't bring up past mistakes." The mother and daughter grew estranged in days filled with blaming each other. On Christmas night, my new apartment was wrapped in warm light. Dad and I, along with my hospital colleagues, sat around the table, enjoying conversation with smiles. A letter arrived in the mailbox. The sender was Martha. Aren't you going to open it? Dad asked. I shook my head and threw the letter unopened into the trash bin. The past is over. We have a new future. Cheers. Jennifer raised her glass. To real family. To real family, everyone clinked their glasses together. I looked up at the starry sky outside the window. My revenge was complete. I would no longer let hatred consume my heart. All that remained was hope for a new beginning. Family isn't just about blood ties, I said quietly. It's the heart that cares for each other that creates a real family. Dad embraced my shoulder and nodded. Our new story would begin from here.